wine, as in a lot of things that people actually can consume, it's a passion first, right? And, it's passion before purpose in a lot of senses, right? We want to make great wine. We make Cabernet Franc, which you mentioned earlier. That's passion first. That's not a business plan, as Pam will tell you. You don't make Cabernet Franc and become a bazillionaire in the wine business. You make Cabernet Sauvignon if you're in Napa, and that's how you're really going to grow your brand. But we love Cab Franc. We love Cabernet Sauvignon too, but those wines do bring people interested in variety, right? And that's important, because if you just made one wine, some people have made a living doing that here in the Valley, but we know that, as generations change and people get older, so the younger generations come in, and I talk about it more in age groups than I would talk about it for generations, just because I think when you turn 40 and you move to the suburbs and you have kids and you get married, you tend to do more entertaining at home, and then wine becomes a bigger part of your life, because Scotch and bourbon and whiskey at high proof, it's not common that people carry that all the way through their life, right? You graduate to something that's a little more healthy, goes with a meal, and wine does that. But if you have one wine and you go into one house, that's all they know, and that's all they're ever going to buy. They're going to look elsewhere. So variety is important so that, people stay connected. Yeah, it's an interesting story. I still find it fascinating that I made it out of Humboldt County, which is known for something completely different. And I worked my way down. I was a grocer. Bagging groceries at Safeway, that was what I started doing. And for me, it was a way to go out on a date that wasn't coffee. It was a public place. It was a fun place to visit. And so we'd go out tasting wine on my days off. And eventually I moved to Napa, working for Safeway, and I was store manager at the one in Napa. And a recruiter came to me and said, "Hey, you want to work for this fancy place called Dean & DeLuca?" And I was like, "Dean and what?" Yeah. And so I ran the Dean & DeLuca here in St. Helena for late 90s, early 2000s. So before press was around, I was running that store. And from there, I fell in love with wine because I was on the retail side. I did what I knew. I would stay over there with the cheese and the charcuterie and coffee and the stuff that I understood. And then finally, Leslie Rudd said, "Hey, Cyrus, you need to get on the other side and learn about wine." And I said, okay.
Twist my arm.
Yeah, well, and I didn't understand it well enough then. Now, boy, that was a major turning point in my life. I tasted 2 days a week. I would taste between 50 and 100 wines a day, and I fell in love with it. All portions of it. You can't do it without tasting a lot of wine. People always go, "Oh my Lord, how did you know that, Cyrus?" Well, I taste 50 wines a day or 100 wines a day. And, from that experience I had at Dean & DeLuca, I found that one wine that went, "Oh wow," the aha moment wine, as people will say. And that wine just catapulted me into spending more time over there, getting very passionate about that business and learning enough to be dangerous, and then start to collect a little bit. So I started to squirrel away bottles and wait for a rainy day, or wait till it was perfectly mature, which of course there's never a perfect day. The perfect day is when you're thirsty for
the day
it, right?
You crack it.
Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. The wine at that stage I was a sponge. And I would sit in that wine room and I would learn. People would show up there, here comes Philippe Melka in the late 90s with a half bottle of wine. He says, "Hey, this is coming out soon. It's called 100 Acre. And here's a half bottle of the first vintage to taste, see if you want to carry it." So it was really an interesting time in the Valley, too, in the late 90s, early 2000s, because it was taking off with a lot of new brands and really, really incredible wine. A lot of wonderful people. And I left. After that, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go explore the world. I go to Portland, so I spend 2-3 years in Portland. Nothing to do with wine other than buying wine and collecting. I worked for Walmart, and I opened up stores, so I'd hire 400 or 500 people in a trailer in the parking lot, and then build the building, and then open it up, be there for 2-3 months, go to the next building. And from there, I got recruited to the Turks and Caicos, so Providenciales. They wanted me to build a Dean & DeLuca type store for Grace Bay, which I designed, and yes, it was quite the boondoggle. It was hard work, but it was a really great experience. And from there, I moved to DC because I met a girl. Followed her to DC. She didn't want to move to Napa. I really wanted to come back here.
She didn't want to come to Napa? Oh my God.
Yeah. Now she is. She loves it here. But good. Yeah. So I fell into. She takes me into a store. I fell into this Total Wine and More gig and didn't even think about it, really. I was there. I said, oh, I'm done with wine. I'm, with wine on the retail side. I'm going to go do distribution or work in a restaurant. I want to do something different, another portion of the wine business. And she took me into the Springfield Total Wine and More, and I went, where am I? It was like Disneyland for adults. Yeah. Thousands and thousands of labels. And when you're here in Napa, you're always interested in knowing these wines. And when you move out of the area and you back there, it's European wines. The DC Metro is very much European driven. And so I got to learn a lot about wine. So I applied for the job. 2 weeks later, I get started. I'm running a store. I'm a wine manager for them. And then, eventually I convinced one of the owners that they need a fine wine sales program. And so David Trone, after a year of me sort of nudging him to move along, said, okay, you go do that. Yeah, so I started this program called Concierge Sales, which still exists today and thriving. And it's a private client business for Total Wine. So it's kind of like the crown jewel on top is Concierge Sales. And so it's wine collectors, Bordeaux futures, a lot of Napa Valley wines. In fact, Total Wine was the number one bidder, had the number one paddle for P&V for many, many years. All that background leads me up to a day in D.C. We had friends, because I lived out here before, friends that had small labels. They come to D.C. and they put on this large event that a retailer back there started. And I met Pam. Actually, my wife met Pam, and then drugged me over there to meet Pam. And that was 16, 15 years ago, and it was just friends right away. My wife invites her to our wedding, which is the next month, and next thing you know, we're flying out here every year to visit my family, and we visit with Pam and her husband Norm, and we'd stay with them for a couple of nights, go see my family and come back. And over the years, as I'm building this concierge sales business for Total Wine, Pam gets to hear about it because I'm telling her every time how excited I am and what's going on and how incredible the business has become when I thought it would never take off. And she says, hey, why don't you come out and take over running my winery for me? And at first I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And then I realized I had to ask my spouse too, because it's not a single side, it's a partnership, right? And so it took us about 5 years to make that happen. She's incredible. I mean, she's one of my best friends. We get to work together, which is also, not a normal combination that works. But she built this thing from scratch. Charlie was supportive, but Pam wrote the business plan. Pam built this place. And, I came in with the knowledge that, I was going to be able to sit next to someone who has done this. And I'll have the founder giving me advice and giving me the history, not through a third-person channel. So you're learning it first person from someone, and there's no better way to learn a business. Everybody can compare something to another. I think that's frankly absurd. Wine comes from each place, terroir, its own soil, its own location. You may like what you get in Bordeaux. I certainly like Bordeaux. Sure. I love Burgundy too. But do I compare that to Napa Valley Cabernet? Or Napa Valley Merlot? No, never, because they're two totally different things. They do, when you come into planning your food or your guests, you might choose one over the other depending on who you're going to see. But on a preference, last night I had a bottle of Bordeaux, and the night before I had a bottle of Cab Franc. So it's not there's room for everyone, right? There's always room for all of them, and you should be diverse in what you choose to consume. It goes back to the beginning of what we talked about, where it's like, oh, we don't just make Cabernet. You were talking about Albariños. Well, we make Sauvignon Blanc, 2 different versions of that. We make sparkling wine that you referenced, Cab Franc at a more economical level, or estate Cab Franc, the original, and then Cabernet Sauvignon, so that there's something to eat and consume with anything you're in, any situation you're in. And the same thing goes, like, we don't just drink our own wines. Otherwise, we'd be in a very small bubble. www.crockerstarr.com, and that's 2 R's at the end of Starr, CrockerStarr.com.
And there is no and in there for the website.
No, the ampersand does not exist yet.